So Kendall Ellis from the United States was recently in the news because she was denied an opportunity to compete on the 4x4 at the Olympic Games here in Paris. And this is very reminiscent of what occurred last time at the Tokyo Olympics when we saw Quinera Hayes, who was the USA champion, very similar to Kendall Ellis this year. And she was also denied the opportunity to compete in the 4x4, that time specifically because of a schedule conflict at the Tokyo Olympics, where the 4x4 overlapped with the 400-meter dash. But let's talk about why Kendall Ellis didn't get the opportunity to compete this time at the Olympics and dive into some of the specifics as they have started to arise just a little bit more. So 3 things I want to dive into today. First off, what actually happened at the Olympics where Kendall Ellis wasn't able to compete in the 4x4? Second, why did it actually happen? What is the reason behind her not being able to run the 4x4 either in the prelims or the finals? And then finally, what could have been done differently? What are some of the alternatives that could have potentially rectified the situation? And what are some things that we should look forward to in the future to potentially not end up in a situation like this? So let's dive into it. First off, what exactly happened? Well, first off, on a basic level, Kendall Ellis did not run the 4x4 at the Olympic Games, despite being the USA champion in the 400 and despite competing in the 400 at these Olympic Games in Paris. Kendall Ellis was apparently informed that she would not be running the relay just about 4 minutes prior to the call time for the race to begin. And Kendall took to Twitter to kind of vocalize, some of her frustrations and a little bit of what exactly happened, where in the morning, she was told that she would be running the 4x4, and then 4 minutes before the call time, she was told that she would not be running. Now, like I said at the top, Kendall Ellis is a USA champion from Olympic trials earlier this year in the 400-meter dash. She also has the second fastest time for any American this year in the 400, only behind McLaughlin-Levrone, who isn't running the 400 flat. She's running the 400-meter hurdles. And then on top of that, at the Olympic Games, she ran the 400. In the heats, she wasn't able to qualify to the semifinals, but we do have the repechage rounds, which give an athlete an opportunity for another chance to compete in the semis. In the repechage round, she ran very, very strong, was able to qualify into the semifinals, and then in those semifinals, she also ran very, very strong, but she was the first person out of qualifying into the final, literally finishing quote-unquote 9th place, or again, 1 spot out of that last time qualifying spot to the final. Now, you also had 2 other Americans. You had Aaliyah Butler as well as Alexis Holmes. Alexis Holmes was successfully able to qualify into the final, so she was going to be there. But Aaliyah Butler, she didn't qualify into the final, and she actually ran a little bit slower than Kendall Ellis did in her semifinal. So on paper, if you want to go by it, you could say Alexis Holmes, the best 400-meter runner at the Olympic Games, Kendall Ellis was next, and then Aaliyah Butler was third. And keep that for context, as I'm going to circle back to that later on. Now, Alexis Holmes, like I noted, she went into the final, and in that final, she actually finished 6th place with a new personal best of 49.77 seconds. So she ran very, very well, and in the context of the 4x4, it seemed that she was very likely going to be running in the final. So now talking about that 4x4, the 4x4 heats are 2 days after the semifinals, and they're actually on the same day as the 400-meter final. So like I noted, Alexis Holmes, she actually made it into the 400-meter final, so she was unable to run the heats on that same day. But you did have all the other women available to be able to run it in the heats, which included Kendall Ellis. But Kendall Ellis didn't run the heats. The team that we saw was Quinera Hayes, Shamir Little, Aaliyah Butler, as well as Kaylin Brown. And like I noted previously, Aaliyah Butler as well as Kendall Ellis, they both ran in the semifinals of the 400 2 days prior, and Kendall Ellis was the higher finisher when talking about the 400-meter dash. So again, on paper, Kendall was quote-unquote the better runner. But it was perfectly fine. We saw that Aaliyah Butler was running in the heats with some of the other women on the 4x4, again, assuming that Kendall Ellis would be going on to the final along with Alexis Holmes, who is running the 400. But fast forward to the final the following day, and this time we also did not see Kendall Ellis running. Here we saw Shamir Little, McLaughlin-Levrone, Gabby Thomas, as well as Alexis Holmes. No Kendall Ellis. And one thing for context here as well is that every single athlete from the heats as well as the final, if the athletes run in the final and they get a medal, all those athletes eventually do get medals as well. And we actually saw it in the award ceremony where every single athlete who ran in the heats and the final was able to stand on the podium and then receive their medals. So that's just a little breakdown of exactly what occurred at the Olympic Games in the 400, the 4x4 heats, as well as the 4x4 final. But let's dive into the next question. Why did this happen? Why is it that Kendall Ellis didn't get a chance to actually run on the 4x4 at the Olympic Games? Well, let's dive into it. So first off, like I noted with Alexis Holmes, she at the Olympic Games was the best 400-meter finisher. She made it into the finals, ran a personal best. So because of that scheduling conflict where the 400 is the same day as the 4x4 heats, it was very clear that she was going to be running in the final, and that made perfect sense. Now, like I noted previously with the Tokyo Olympic Games where Quinera Hayes, she made the 400-meter final but was unable to run in the 4x4, it's because there was that scheduling conflict. But at those Tokyo Olympics, you had both Allison Felix as well as Quinera Hayes running in the 400-meter final. This time, you only had Alexis Holmes. So we didn't have to worry about one athlete not getting the chance to run on the 4x4. Alexis Holmes was running. So that accounts for Alexis Holmes. But then what about the other athletes? Well, Shamir Little. Shamir Little had been running the mixed relay as well as the 4x4. And in that 4x4 heat, she had an amazing split. And it gave her the justification to say, okay, great. You proved yourself. You're going to be running in the final. So Shamir Little, Alexis Holmes, those two are accounted for. Outside of that, you did have Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone as well as Gabby Thomas. Sydney, she actually is impeccable when talking about the 400. She's the U.S. leader at 48.7, and she also ran 50.3 in the 400-meter dash, which is actually faster than Kendall Ellis ran in the semifinals, as well as Aaliyah Butler ran in the semifinals. So by default, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone is, of course, the best 400-meter runner in the United States right now, and she, of course, was going to be on that final. Finally, Gabby Thomas. Gabby Thomas also is a very, very strong 400-meter runner, personal best of 49.868 seconds, but this year, she had also run the 4x4 at the World Relays, where she ran both the 4x1 and the 4x4, and she essentially had proved herself as a very strong relay runner, again, specifically on this 4x4. So that accounts for all the women, and really just to highlight this point, the United States has so much depth. So pulling an athlete like a Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, pulling an athlete like a Gabby Thomas, that's possible because there's so much depth in all these other events. At the last Olympic Games, the reason that Quinera Hayes was unable to run is because there were other athletes from different events. Athing Mo, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, Dalilah Muhammad, they all run different events, but because they're able to run quality 400s, they were tapped for the 4x4 final. Now, here in Paris, on the final day, after all these tweets started to come out from Kendall Ellis, ESPN actually had an article that dove a little bit deeper into this and spoke to Kendall to get an understanding of her perspective and exactly what went on. Now, in the ESPN article, it notes that Kendall Ellis woke up on Saturday morning, the morning of the 4x4 final, and she got a text hearing that she would not be running in it. What she did was she asked Coach Michelle Lewis-Freeman, who is the head coach of the USA Women's Relays, she asked her for a meeting to be able to discuss this decision. Now, in this meeting, Freeman apparently spoke about how Kendall is relatively inconsistent in the 400 meters. And as I noted earlier, she was the USA champion, but when she got to the Olympic Games, she ran the heats and didn't do very well. She then got to the repechage rounds, did do very well, got to the semifinals, did do very well. So some ups and downs, again, when talking about Kendall Ellis's performances, which do speak to those inconsistencies that might be seen on the surface. But at the end of this conversation, Coach Freeman apparently told Kendall Ellis that she was ready to run and to get ready for the third leg in the 4x4 final. So based on this, if Kendall was supposed to run third leg, we can potentially speculate, not confirmed at all, that maybe Gabby Thomas was the one who was added in place of Kendall Ellis. But again, not confirmed. They may have switched the order. Who knows what it may have been. But as it continues, it says that Kendall was warming up, assuming that she would be running in that 4x4 final that night. But right before check-in, apparently another USA coach, who's unknown at this moment, told Kendall that she would not be running the relay. Kendall then told Quincy Watts, who is her own personal coach, who then called over Michelle Lewis-Freeman, who apparently told Quincy Watts that Kendall is not running on the 4x4 relay. And all this was 4 minutes before the call time for the race. And at the end of the day, as you can kind of see through the interactions, through, this article, the story, it seems like there's a lot of lack of communication between the athletes, the coaches, and everyone who may be involved with this relay, where I'm looking on the surface where you're saying Kendall Ellis spoke with Michelle Lewis-Freeman in the morning, and then you had another coach come to her when she was warming up saying that she's not running. Then Kendall went to her own coach went to Michelle Lewis-Freeman. So there's a lot of gaps in this story where, I don't know, did, Michelle Lewis-Freeman speak directly to Kendall and say at the moment that she's not running? Later on, I'm talking about 4 minutes before call time. Who is this other coach, and why is it that, they told Kendall as opposed to Michelle Lewis-Freeman? Why is it that, Coach Quincy Watts is involved in this case? Maybe there's some separation that's needed. I don't know. But all these kind of questions lead to the idea that there is a lack of communication that, for us just outside looking in, kind of leads to the confusion that we are having. So let me dive into my thoughts on what could be done differently. And these are just my personal thoughts. But before I dive into it, just want to provide some clarity. This is not about Kendall's performances or her ability, at least in my opinion. Yes, we did hear that Coach Michelle Lewis-Freeman spoke to the inconsistencies of Kendall's season, but I don't want to harp on that too much. And I know people online have been saying that, oh, if Kendall ran the final, then maybe they wouldn't have gotten the American record, or maybe if Kendall won the final, regardless, they would have gotten the gold medal. All those things, to me, for the most part, are moot. The idea that I'm thinking about and that I'm really focused on is that lack of communication and why Kendall should have still been given an opportunity to run in the 4x4. Maybe not the final, but potentially in that prelim. Also, again, the communication is my bigger issue, where there's so many open questions about these interactions that we just don't know that make it seem like there just wasn't clear communication with someone like Kendall Ellis, with, Michelle Lewis-Freeman, with Quincy Watts, with whoever this other coach. So many, parties are involved that make it a lot more confusing for us on the outside looking in. On top of that, this is not to put down any side, right? I don't want to put down Kendall Ellis because maybe she was a little inconsistent this year, right? I don't think she deserves that. I also don't want to put down, Michelle Lewis-Freeman because she's the relay coach and making these decisions, right? These are very tough decisions for someone like Michelle Lewis-Freeman to make. Again, communication, not exactly sure what may be going on in the background, but it is very, very challenging for, again, Michelle Lewis-Freeman as well as Kendall Ellis. And I've spoken to both of them, not in the context of the situation in terms of recently, but I've had the opportunity to interview both of them. And both of them are very kind, very understanding, and I don't think either of them mean any malice or any harm to either person, right? So just want to make sure that context is clear. On top of that, I did speak with Michelle Lewis-Freeman in the Bahamas explicitly about, making the decision on, who's going to run in the 4x4. You can check out that interview that I did on the City of Smack YouTube channel right here. And again, gave some context, but this is, of course, a very tricky situation. So just to be clear, I want to be as fair as possible to all parties who are involved and everybody who's kind of part of this situation. But let me dive into what I think could have been done differently in this Kendall Ellis situation. First off, I think the communication is absolutely key. Kendall Ellis apparently was texted that she would not be on the relay that morning. She did get a chance to speak with Michelle Lewis-Freeman. I think that is excellent communication there. But then as the day went on, she got a chance to warm up, and then 4 minutes before, she found out that she is not running. Not from Michelle Lewis-Freeman, from the head coach, but from a different coach, someone who's unnamed. Maybe it's the assistant relay coach. Maybe it's someone else who's, of relative importance at USATF. Who knows? But she did get it from another source that does unfortunately leave the perception that there wasn't a clear communication there. On top of that, again, just based on the account that we have, at least from Kendall Ellis' side in this ESPN article, Kendall Ellis spoke with Quincy Watts, who then spoke with Michelle Lewis-Freeman. We don't know if Michelle ever came up to, Kendall Ellis. We don't know if Kendall Ellis ever went up to Coach Freeman. So we don't know what the interaction is. And again, we don't even know why they may not have, spoken. We do know they did speak that morning, but one thing that's key is Kendall did go to speak with Michelle Lewis-Freeman with a liaison. So who knows what the interaction may have been. But on that communication piece, if there was a change, whether it's last minute, whether it's in the morning, whether it's in the afternoon, that should be communicated immediately for the athlete, right? And I do think, again, building off that, it should be communicated by the person who actually makes that decision. Again, all we're hearing is that there's some other coach that came up to Kendall Ellis and told her that she's not running. I don't know. Maybe that is a person who makes the decision. I don't know. But there should be more clear communication, and it should be very straightforward as best as possible. Again, this is just my opinion based on information that we do know. I think it's unfair for Kendall to hear these details and this information that she's not running at the last minute before, in theory, she's supposed to go into the call room with the other athletes who are running the 4x4. Do the other athletes, did they know, right? I don't know. But communication is absolutely key here. But moving off the communication, in my opinion, I think that Kendall Ellis should have run the 4x4 prelims instead of Aaliyah Butler. And let me lay this out. This is no slight to Aaliyah Butler in any capacity. Like I noted earlier, the 400 meters semifinals was 2 days prior to the 4x4 heats. So both Kendall as well as Aaliyah Butler, they did have the chance to rest both the same amount, and Kendall Ellis actually did better in the semifinals than Aaliyah Butler. Like I said, Kendall Ellis was just one spot from making that final. Also, she has the other accolades. She's run 49.5. She is the USA champion this year. So she is slightly better than Aaliyah Butler on paper when talking about the 400 this year. So I think that she should have gotten a spot in at least the prelims. Then if you want to pull her out from the finals, that's perfectly fine, but at least she gets a chance to compete. And like I noted, this isn't a slight to Aaliyah Butler, but Aaliyah Butler is significantly younger. She'll definitely have a lot more opportunities as we look forward into the future for not only making Team USA, competing in the 400, competing in the relay. She will have a lot more opportunities coming. Kendall Ellis, she's of course more on the experience side. She's been competing internationally since 2017. This is her first Olympics in the 400 Open, and I think that she should have gotten that opportunity in the 4x4 instead of Aaliyah Butler, because she did much better. So that's just my personal thought, not saying it's 100% fact and this is exactly how it should be, but I do think that Kendall Ellis running in the heats would have been a good decision just over Aaliyah Butler, give Aaliyah Butler another opportunity in the future like you do for many other athletes. For example, look in 2021, you had someone like Shea Anderson. Shea Anderson actually qualified in the relay pool to the Olympic Games in Tokyo, and she traveled to Tokyo with the team, potentially was going to run, but she didn't actually get the opportunity to run. She was still competing, I think, at UCLA at the time. She was still very young, got the experience to travel, but she didn't run on the relay. She actually didn't run anything at all. Also, here in Paris, you did have Isabelle Whitaker, right? She was selected as part of the relay pool. She did travel to Paris, right? She was able to get the experience of coming here, but she didn't run on any of the relays, either the mix or the 4x4. She's young, she's still developing experience. She is competing in the NCAA for Penn. She's gonna have a very, very bright future, even though she didn't get to compete here. Look at Aaliyah Butler though, on the flip side. Aaliyah Butler is competing individually in the 400. So she did get the chance to actually experience the Olympic Games. She did get the chance to run in both the heats and the semifinals. So she did get that experience. Whereas Kendall Ellis, she also ran the 400, but she has more experience, both in the individual as well as on the relay. Put her in the heats, I think that'll be great. While Aaliyah Butler, she'll definitely get some more experience as we move into the future. And again, I want to be clear, this isn't to disparage Aaliyah Butler in any capacity. I think she is an absolutely amazing athlete. But if we're making these kind of decisions, I do think that Kendall Ellis probably should get the slight edge over Aaliyah Butler to be able to run in the 4x4 heats. Then at that point, you don't have to worry about, okay, is she going to run the final or is she not? You can make a clear determination based on what she ran in the heats and see, okay, great, you did excellent in the heats, we're going to put you in the final. Just like they did for Shamir Little. Shamir Little had already run the mixed relays and the 4x4 heats. In those 4x4 heats, she did amazing, so that justified her going into the final. They've done this many times on the relays. I think that could have been done for Kendall Ellis. Have her run in the 4x4 heats. It was already 2 days after the semifinals. She already was the best, 400-meter runner, only outside of Alexis Holmes. Give her a chance to run in those heats. That would have been my thought process and my idea on how Kendall Ellis could have run the 4x4 and not, have all this controversy kind of surround the Olympic Games and the United States relays, just like we did in 2021 with Quinera Hayes missing the 4x4. This also doesn't look great for USATF, where, they have this controversy around them in terms of leaving an athlete off, maybe not communicating, right? Questions around their decision making in terms of the relays. All those things don't make it look good for USATF. And finally, one thing that I really think might be important, it doesn't exactly apply to this situation, but I think the Olympic Games, the Olympic Committee, whoever makes the schedule, World Athletics, they need to change it so that the 400-meter dash does not conflict with the 4x4. There's no reason why there should be the 400-meter final on the same day as the 4x4 heats. That unfortunately presents more confusion when we're talking about who's going to run the 4x4, who's going to run the heats, who's going to run the final. If you already have the 400s done before the 4x4 starts, exactly like the men do, then you can essentially start from fresh and look at the 400s, see the 3 women who already ran great or who didn't run well, make a determination if they're going to run the heats and the final, and then just have it set at that point. Move forward. Who runs great in the heats? Maybe you'll go into the final. Who are some of the other athletes in other events? Might you be able to run in the final? That's what I think should be done. We need to just get rid of this, 400-meter 4x4 conflicts. It's been done in the past. It's only occurred in 2021 and 2024, but I think it could just eliminate a lot of ambiguity and a lot of confusion. Again, this isn't exactly that same situation, but I do think that that schedule conflict has some factors into why this became very, very confusing. Now, like always, the United States is always an exception when talking about the depth. There are so many women, so many men from other events who are able to be pulled into the 4x4, which makes it very, very tricky. In this case, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, Gabby Thomas, both of them came from different events, didn't contest the 400, but they're excellent 400 runners, so they were put in the final. So in closing, this is a very unfortunate situation where Kendall Ellis does not get the opportunity to run on the 4x4 and is unfortunately going home back to the United States without a relay medal. All the other athletes who ran in both the heats as well as the final are now going home with a gold medal in the 4x4. But those are just my thoughts overall about Kendall Ellis being left off the 4x4 at the Olympic Games here in Paris, France. Let me know what you think. Do you think she should have run the final? Or maybe you think she should have run the heats and then make a determination on if she should move over into the final. Let me know what you think. Always appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.